So from a bad perspective, I think it has definitely impacted student and probably faculty mental health and well-being. Education and humans are social animals. We do like some in-person interaction, and we know that learning is also somewhat of an in-person interaction. Doesn't mean it has to be 24/7 or all the time or always on, but there definitely is an interpersonal interaction, especially with young people when it comes to education. And so I think that if there is any bad portion of the pandemic, it has been the lack of in-person interaction among students. And by the way, the next generation of students as well. I have a 10 and 12-year-old at home. And social learning is even more important for them, and socialization is even more important for them as part of education. I think that is going to have long-term impacts down the road for colleges and universities around the globe. But on a good front, I think it has inserted a flexibility that we didn't know was possible, or we knew was possible, we just weren't willing to do it before the pandemic. Within a couple of days in March of 2020, I saw institutions around the world rethink almost everything that they were doing. Clearly, the biggest thing that everyone knows about is the move from face-to-face to virtual learning. And that to me has longer term impacts, but there's also other things as well. Academic calendars, which tend to be chiseled in stone at most institutions around the world, suddenly we're now much more flexible. The idea about whether you learn in person or online, or maybe a hybrid of both, whether you live on campus as well, how research is conducted across time zones. All of these things that we thought there was a certain way of doing it, now suddenly was upended by the pandemic, and habits have changed as a result. So I think the longer term impact of the pandemic is a much more flexible post-secondary, tertiary education system that I think over time will serve learners of all ages much better than the pre-COVID system. Most of the time that when we have thought about our learners, we've segmented them into two groups. Traditional, 18 plus, early 20s, right? That transition from high school to career. And then non-traditional, which is everybody else, essentially everybody else. Well, no brand out there, no segment of the economy that is consumer facing thinks of its customers in only two ways, and largely around age, right? So I think there are so many different segments of learners out there. And I don't want to call them students anymore, because they are learners, because I think when we think students, we tend to think young and we tend to think physical. They have to be in a physical spot learning, and they tend to be young. If we think of them as learners, we do tend to start to think of now people lifelong who need to learn for their careers. So yes, I think it opens up more segments where there were probably students or learners you were never serving before that you now can serve. But the other thing about online, I don't think it's a binary choice. I want to be an online student, or I want to be a face-to-face student or learner. I think it's really now around a lot more flexibility. I talked in my keynote address here around kind of consumer choice. So for example, now when we go shopping, we don't make a distinction about whether we're doing shopping online or shopping in person. We decide in the moment whether we want to shop in a store, whether we want to buy something online and have it shipped to us, whether we want to pick something up at the curb or inside the store and having ordered it previously. Could we think of that same experience where we don't have as much personalization? Because it's hard, I think, for institutions to think, well, we're going to teach somebody online one day and in person the next day and online the following day. But where there is a lot more flexibility, more hybrid, for example, where I can take some of my courses online, some in person, where I can take a portion of a course, maybe the lecture part online, so that I can really focus on it, and then go in person to meet with a faculty member around a project or around a lab, for example. That's the kind of flexibility I think we need to take from every other consumer interaction we have now. That to me, when I say flexibility after the pandemic, is how I'm thinking about how we design the future of higher ed. Was that we tended to digitize parts of campus that needed to be, the classroom, for example, student records and things like that, but we haven't connected them. I call it the plumbing. We have the plumbing in place, but but we haven't connected the plumbing of this so that we have a much more seamless system. So that when a student comes into the university through admissions, that then handoff is less seamless or more seamless to those who are in charge of student records, who then to academic advisors and faculty members, and then as alumni of that institution. That it's a much more seamless system that follows that student through the process. So we know when they're getting stuck, why they're getting stuck, other offerings we can give to that person, especially over their lifetime. I mean, that's the big change I think coming out of the pandemic from the economy writ large is the job market is changing. Jobs are changing, careers are changing. We are going to need education that is continual, not episodic. What do I mean by that? We used to think of going back to school as a thing, right? I'm working in a job, I need training, I want to get a promotion, I want to change careers. I'm going to go back to school was the phrase. We thought of it as we stopped doing something to do something else, in this case, education. I don't think that's going to be really the case. It isn't the case anymore, and it will be less the case in the future, where I think education is going to be continual. Well, the problem is that most traditional universities around the world don't really operate that way, right? They think of you applying to a program and being in that program. They don't think of you, I'm taking a course today because I want to get a promotion tomorrow. They don't think that way. Now, there is a whole new cadre of education providers out there that think that way. The Coursera's of the world, the edX's of the world. There's all of these education providers out there that think you need a single course or a single class to get promoted tomorrow. Universities don't think that way. And I think that is a huge market for colleges and universities going forward. Oh, I think there's still value. I think it's still a signal. I still think it's a very strong signal of discipline, of finishing something, of expertise in some ways. I think that Paul LeBlanc talked here about this idea of what do you really know when you know that degree. I think we're starting to get better at that, these competencies, building these competencies into degrees or micro degrees. And I think, and I know you're doing a lot of experiments around kind of blockchain technologies around the degree. So once learners own their learning, meaning they own the assets of their learning, not only the degrees, the micro-credentials, the competencies, all of that that's underlying that degree. Once they own that, that becomes much more transferable and transportable for them. And when they could do this by showing a QR code to an employer and say, yes, I know all of this and it's been verified, and here it is, here's the evidence of that learning. I think that really changes the equation. It doesn't mean the degree goes away, but the degree is then only one of many signals that you know something. And the question is, can universities pivot in a way to offer these other assets of learning, competencies, for example, micro degrees? I think universities are so stuck in their legacies of these old style degrees and programs. It's very hard for them to think differently. We have to create a student experience. We have to create a learning experience that can only be done on campus, right? So they're not going to come for a lecture, right? They're not going to come for a meeting with their faculty member, right? I think that in-person office hours with faculty members are a thing of the past, right? I think most of that's going to be done online. But what will they come for? Hands-on research, hands-on projects, more group discussions about problems to be solved, right? I think experiential learning will get them to come to campus. It might get them to come off campus to go to an employer to do work as well, right? But I think you have to offer them some sort of experiential, hands-on learning so that they apply. The only way they can apply what they're learning online from home is to come to campus. That has to be a much better experience than it was in the past. And then around that, you could build social experiences, but there has to be a magnet for them to come. When we think of student success in the past, we've always thought of it as either financial or we thought of the hurdles as financial or academic. The reason why students didn't succeed was because of academics or financial. I think well-being is a huge piece of that. It's the third leg of that stool. And as a result, we need to have the resources available to these students from day one in order to be thinking about that. We also need to be tracking students in a much better way. Again, this goes back to data. Are students showing up? Are they signing on? Is there a change in their academic, faculty members are really the front line on this to know when there is a change in students. And is there an easy way for faculty members to record that, to report that? Again, it's the tracking of the data that I think ends up helping us identify those students who do need help. And that we think of this not as another service, because I think that too many universities think, oh, this is something else that we have to do. But it's really part and parcel of the student success that I think most universities are interested in doing, right? And how do we help our students succeed? And it's not just academic and financial anymore, it is also well-being. Well, I think one of it is to understand what are the products we're selling and to whom we're selling it to. Right now, we basically offer one product to one set of students, and largely degrees to undergraduate and graduate students who are of a certain age. So I think that we need to rethink that product mix and who we're serving. I think that will increase the value to those people who don't see themselves in higher education right now. I think that will make higher education much more equitable. I also think that we need to figure out what the package looks like. Again, the packages that we sell students now are very old school in terms of types of degrees. Are there different types of packages where some degrees might be shorter, and then there's an add-on to get these micro-credentials. Some other degrees might include micro-credentials, so everybody graduates with some sort of industry-recognized certificate, which gives them more value. But we could do all that and nobody knows about it. So the other piece of this is communicating the value of higher education. And not just the economic value. I get it that most people go to higher education to better their lives and to get a job. But there's so many other aspects of higher education that you may not realize that are actually critical to living a better life. Your health is going to be better. You're going to be more connected to your community. There's obviously larger issues around government and self-government in the world and just community in general that we need to sell higher education on, so that it's not just seen as an economic marker. Because when it's just seen as an economic marker, what ends up happening is, first of all, people only go into careers that they find are going to pay off. And we heard Paula Blank again talk yesterday about the humanities and the decline of the humanities. It's a huge problem in the United States right now because people don't think there's an economic payoff. But there actually is, first of all, an economic payoff. But we need these people to help us continue on, forward, right? We need a vast array of people with different majors. So I think that I think one piece of it is figuring out what your packages are that you're selling, and second is